Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I am the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the non-profit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm delighted to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate This Body I Wore. And I'm joined by Diana, who is the author of this book. Diana, we are also joined by our friends from Left Bank Books in St. Louis, Missouri. Left Bank is, in many ways, a sister store to Karis. We have a long and warm friendship with Left Bank, and so we're really delighted to have y'all here with us, folks from St. Louis. If folks want to shout out where you're watching from, if you're here from Left Bank, feel free to put it in the chat, say hello. You can ask a question at any time by clicking the Ask a Question tab button down at the bottom center of your screen, or you can put it in the chat and I'll work it into the conversation. Diana and I have been pre-gaming a lot. So the good thing is we have a lot to talk about. And I'm really, really excited. So welcome, Diana. How's your day going, just in general?
Oh, thanks, ER. It's nice to be here at Charis, at am I saying that right? Charis Books?
It's Karis, like charismatic.
Oh, I like that. Okay. Yeah. Charismatic, but Karis Books, and also at Left Bank. I was just told I have my name in the paper in St. Louis, so I'll write home about that. And yeah, doing great today. I've really been looking forward to this reading and our conversation.
So I was really, really excited to talk about this book because there are just so many things in This Body I Wore that sort of defy convention of a trans narrative. And as a trans person and a trans writer, it is really important to me that our stories get to be more complex than the traditional, often pathologized or medicalized narrative. There are a lot of legitimate reasons why people historically and even contemporarily choose to write kind of a linear transition story or a linear story of coming out or a linear story about how one makes meaning of their life. But I really love the ways that your story, as you've written it, resists some of those narratives. And so one of the things that I was most excited about is that you...
By the way, I just want you to know, all of that sounds good. I'm just trying to break someone's heart.
Well, I think you do that. I think you do that very effectively.
And they'll be the judge when I do a reading, because we're going to have a reading at some point. But, all of that sounds good, but I just wanted to break people's hearts.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I think that's the thing is like there's a human, and we'll get to the fact that you're a practicing Buddhist and a poet, but I think those things are inextricable from how this narrative is put together, right? There's a humanity and a messiness to this that's that's sitting right next to the discipline of this, right? And I think that's a really beautiful
heartbreak.
Just heartbreak. So, there you go.
It's really simple.
Once you front load heartbreak, I guess maybe everything else falls into place.
You just coast.
I mean, it works. This book is getting incredible reviews. It's really, people are really connecting with it. Cis people, trans people, folks all over the US, and I'm sure soon around the world will really be connecting with it. So I do want you to read. I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the beginning and why, what I think will be interesting to particularly like maybe trans folks who are a little bit younger or people who are coming out in today's world of trans politics, who maybe don't have any background in understanding the role that the cross-dressing community and transvestite community played in sort of what has now become this big transgender umbrella, right? We're often talked about as if we all just get along under this big trans umbrella, but certainly in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of animosity between trans people or transsexuals, people who felt that they were, born in the wrong body and had transitioned, versus people who identified as cross-dressers or transvestites, or in the TV community. And there's a really great scene in your book where you kind of are exploring that. So I wonder if you can kind of set that up and read for us, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, it was a different world. In the 80s and the 90s. And, there's plenty of history before that as well. We each sort of walked in the room at our time that we walked in the room. And, what I remember most from the 80s. So I plunged into this world of New York City cross-dressing, in the mid 1980s. Having come to New York for graduate school, I was born here and then I returned, and then I started a high school, public school teaching career. And I think all of us in our little pockets were all pretty scared. We never would have said the word community, trans community. It was almost a contradiction in terms. We didn't even have the word trans. And the chapter that ER and I were talking about that we had in mind was a chapter called The Fabric Factory, where it was about the most eclectic transvestite bar, transgender bar, another word we didn't have, but in New York City. And we were all kind of there together. And I naturally knew the cross-dressing contingent. And at the time, we didn't think of ourselves as, transsexuals because of the boundaries you were mentioning. And at the beginning, there's a note on language. It's only about a paragraph. So I'll just read the note. And then I'll just read the chat. It's a short chapter. It's 5 pages. So here's the note about language. This memoir spans several decades during which trans people in the United States referred to themselves in various and changing ways. To take one example, in the 1980s, the terms crossdresser and transvestite were practically interchangeable. Today, the latter term is generally frowned on, while the former is still accepted. Likewise, some of today's conventions are bound to become problematic for future readers. In this book, I sought to use terminology authentic to the era of each experience. As I and others around me tried to make sense of our identities, language was part of what shaped our reality. We misgendered and dead-named ourselves left and right, in part because words like misgender and dead-name had yet to come into use. By the same token, words matter, pronouns matter, misgendering matters, and for those who are aided by trigger notices, this is to respectfully advise you. So that kind of is a tuning fork for the book. And then I'll just, I'll read this chapter now. It's a few pages into the book. It's called The Fabric Factory. And I think, for the purpose of Crowdcast, as I read, I'm going to be looking at the screen. I have a digital copy, which may seem weird. So, feel free to just kind of recline or put on headphones or, look away, close your eyes, relax, and do whatever you like to do when somebody reads you a story. The Fabric Factory, 1987. The Fabric Factory bar on West 41st Street has a dressing room in the basement for men who arrive in trousers and polo shirts carrying duffel bags and appear an hour later at the top of the stairs in gowns or skirt suits, teetering in high heels like newborn colts, though most arrive already dressed as women. They come from as far as Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. They have shaved and prepped themselves all afternoon, appropriated clothes from their wives' closets, snuck out to their cars at dusk, braved the stares of highway toll takers, risked getting pulled over by troopers. By midnight, they have 5 o'clock shadows. I take the subway from Brooklyn. I'm safe on mass transit, I tell myself, as long as I go all out, like an actor who fully commits. Even if the material is flawed, people respect the effort. Some riders look at me, then look away. And those who don't notice me at all, well, that's even better. I dress like an ordinary woman coming from work. Most cross-dressers overdo it in some way. A crazy wig or garish makeup, a too tight outfit, or stiletto slingbacks they can't manage. Not that I don't respect whatever turns them on. I just happen to get turned on by blending. I'd like, with my first step inside the Fabric Factory, to be seen as a woman who entered the wrong bar. There's a contingent of Filipino pre-ops who hang out near the front window. They wear little slinky dresses and speak to each other in rapid-fire Tagalog while tossing their hair and checking themselves in compact mirrors. There's a small lineup of chasers who lean against the opposite wall, deciding, sometimes for hours, which girl they will approach. If one of them asks to buy me a drink, I might accept, but I'll tell him it's only a drink. There are TVs from a suburban New Jersey support group who drink together in a small pack and seem like they could be tailgating at Giants Stadium. There's Vicky from Long Beach, who supports an aging mother and a kid in college by working a security job. She wears see-through tops and miniskirts over bare legs and speaks in a saccharine falsetto. There's Adele, a married TV who is smart and stable and 10 years my senior. She's neither ugly nor stunning, wears designer labels, is quite ladylike and fairly passable. I like talking to Adele. Sometimes she brings her wife Mara, who is plump with a pretty face and is often the only GG, genetic girl, in the bar. She and Mara have no children and use an entire bedroom of their house as a closet. I picture aisles of stylish clothes, like a small store the two of them share. Stephanie from Long Island wears fake dagger-like nails, a long black wig, heavy makeup, and super short skirts, but cancels these efforts by walking and talking like a building contractor in stilettos, which she is. She shows up maybe once a month, drinks a lot, and discusses her truck. We envy her size 7.5 feet. Kayla, young, tall, and pretty, visits from Tennessee a few times a year. She is on a mission to compete in drag beauty pageants and is on hormones to grow breasts to help the cause. After she wins one, she swears she'll stop the hormones. She's unbuttoned her blouse just low enough to display a smooth chest flesh and the budding of some cleavage, a sight that fills me with shock and envy. In Tennessee, Kayla lives as a man named Ken, who binds breasts in ace bandages to patrol center field for his company's softball team. Stan, a Vietnam vet, wears Mary Jane flats, a black pageboy wig, a shapeless cotton frock, and has no girl name. The first time I saw him, he was handcuffed to a young black woman who hardly spoke. I couldn't quite figure out their dynamic. There are drag queens who drop by after their midnight shows at Hell's Kitchen bars, gay boys as tall as NBA forwards who wear hip pads and butt pads and have racks you could fold laundry on. They talk exclusively to one another as though they are royalty. If we're lucky, we may get a visit from International Crisis, who is royalty. Salvador Dali's one-time transsexual muse, often seen on page 6 of the New York Post and rumored to be dating some Hollywood actor. Crisis trails her entourage of taciturn queers, her red cheeks puffed around a small chiseled nose, her cleavage carved deep from mail-order progesterone that will overtake her liver in 2 years' time. We come to the fabric factory like animals to water, whether we drink or not, whether we mingle or dance or sit alone in a corner just enjoying the feeling of being in our clothes, we are nourished. Every time we hear the pronoun she and realize it's us, there's a shock and shiver of life. We tell one another how we got through our week, the hiding, the purging, the fear, the thrill. Someone's wife was in tears again, threatening to leave. Someone was spotted by a cop while getting dressed behind bushes in a vacant lot, though the cop mercifully let her alone. We share our confusion. How can we love sports and car engines and also love this? How can we love women and also this? I consider myself a lesbian, says a huge crossdresser in a yellow prom dress. We talk about how we handle our families, those who have families, and church, those who attend. We trade advice on how to create cleavage, cover beard shadow, fill bras, tuck our genitals, what to tell our coworkers who ask about our long nails. I play guitar, our long hair, I'm in a band, our shaved legs, I'm a cyclist or a swimmer, our tweezed eyebrows. I don't know what you're talking about. We tell each other where we shop, thrift stores with dressing rooms, the clearance rack at the Brooklyn A&S, a naturalizer shoe store on Fifth Avenue specializing in wide sizes, the wig salon in a hidden alcove on the 7th floor of Macy's. Most of us have visited Lee's Mardi Gras boutique, the transvestite supply store on West 14th Street, reachable only by a private elevator sent down when you ring the bell. The merchandise is overpriced, maybe because most of the customers are too scared to go anywhere else. When I tried on some things and decided not to buy them, Lee said, "Sweetie, you can't just come in here and play dress up." And I haven't shopped there since. There's talk of a ladies' boutique out by the Pennsylvania state line, where angelic saleswomen bring you things to try on in the back. A few cross-dressers get everything by mail, having found catalogs that ship to customers in, praise God, unmarked packages. I shop anywhere, Adele says with a shrug. They just want our money. We report on places we can go. Someone found a Midtown hotel bar that doesn't mind our presence. Someone found a diner in Queens. There's the Pyramid Club in the East Village, a big, loud, punk, goth, queer, grungy den of who the fuck cares. Excuse me. Sally's Hideaway, a couple blocks north and across from the New York Times building, has drag shows, drugs, and prostitutes, or you could stick by the bar and just smoke and drink. Club Edelweiss is too hardcore for most of us, though there are always some stunning transsexuals there. Tranny Chasers, that's actually the name of the place. Below ground on 7th Avenue South is more tame. In the months since stepping out for the first time, I have been to nearly all these places, though there is nothing quite like the Fabric Factory, eclectic, warm, and welcoming. Like your first Little League field, it is both a home and a destination. A man can wander aimlessly in a city at night, but a lady needs a destination. During the week, garment district executives come here to drink their lunches, but every Saturday, the Fabric Factory is ours, and the disco ball in the middle of the ceiling shines its ever-receding facets on the faces of people we are 20 years away from having any respectable words for. Roy, the mustachioed Australian bartender who runs the place, is jovial, happy to profit from all the perfumed bacchanalia. He's also happy to let Vicky from Long Beach be our DJ. And Vicky is a horrible DJ whose playlist never makes it past the disco era. "Last call for alcohol," Roy shouts at 3:45. And Saturday night at the Fabric Factory is about to come to a halt. Soon the lights go up and Roy starts chanting GTFO, but we don't want to leave. Pre-op girls approach bashful chasers and they haggle over the price of a blowjob. $30 in the bathroom. GTFO, Roy shouts. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. 25 in my car. Where's your car? GTFO, Roy shouts, then breaks it down. Get the fuck out. We stagger on to West 41st Street into a false dawn radiating from Times Square and scatter like roaches down Midtown blocks. Some head for the subway. Some get behind the wheel to drive back to the suburbs. Others climb in cabs headed downtown to after-hours clubs where ladies get in free, then get in trouble. This is who we are every Saturday when we put on other names and bargain with urges that run our lives like bullies in the shadows. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted you to read that section because it's such a beautiful moment in time, such a slice of life, and it's so beautifully realized the way that you've written it. And I think what struck me so much about it is it's a slice of life that even within books by trans authors, we don't get to see very often, because again, cross-dressers have been really excluded from larger narratives about the trans movement, for lots of reasons. And I'm wondering if we kind of were joking, like, we don't know who's going to be watching this. Is kind of an in-group conversation, but I would love to kind of get into it a little bit, because um, not not all cross-dressers, in fact, most cross-dressers don't end up transitioning, right? And so, what does it mean to you to have captured this beautiful, painful, complicated moment in history, and then to have lived through it, and ended up in a
Right.
different moment in history?
Yeah, it's a great issue. As I was mentioning to you while we were pre-gaming this, so I didn't come out as trans till I was 50, and a lot of the people who were like my trans age, the people who started hormones the same time I did and were in support groups, a lot of them, if they weren't much younger than me, they certainly hadn't been where I'd been in the 80s and 90s, and they had their own experiences. And this was unique about me. And so, and I always knew this was something different, about me from the other people I was kind of coming out with. And it was just sitting there. And, the moment around, for me anyway, around 2014, 2013 was so surreal. I never thought I would live to see my culture do what it was doing. I couldn't believe it. As a trans person in the Obama administration, in fact, the word transgender, I still remember when it was in a State of the Union speech for the first time. I believe it was until Obama's second term. That was surreal. Now we don't even think about it. There's a T in LGBT. I mean, that wasn't the case ever. And as soon as I started getting used to that surreal circumstance, what happened in turn was the 80s and 90s and what I'd been through, suddenly that seemed surreal. It's like, holy crap, that was pretty bizarre. And up until then, it was just my closeted life. There's no witness. So it wasn't really seen as anything. So, and then I start to see, a lot of this online chatter. I mean, what I read to you was pre-internet. And, so you see this online chatter, especially in this century, just deriding people who are cross-dressers. When that cross-dresser saved my life, and it's one of these steps that so many people go through. I mean, a lot of trans people go through this kind of stone in the river. They step on this medium place where they identify as queer, as gay, so they think it's about sexual orientation. They don't know better, or maybe they do, but that's that middle step. And then they either stay there and that's who they are, or they keep going. And I think so many cross-dressers, that's the way. So anyhow, I just don't think there's anything to be ashamed of ever, no matter where you land on or where you pass through. And it's really a shame the way people somehow have to define themselves against others, which is the first Buddhist skanda, by the way.
So, since you brought up Buddhism, I would love to talk about how Buddhism plays a role in this book, because so there's the transgender tipping point, which you talked about sort of in 2013. Laverne Cox is on the cover of Time magazine, and but you found yourself and understood yourself to be a woman at a Buddhist retreat, right? Like you had a moment of spiritual clarity on your own, and so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how your spirituality helped you kind of move through these various stages of your life.
Well, there's a wonderful point in Buddhist Dharma that there's no such thing as sudden. Even things that are sudden have been being prepared for a long, long time, and we didn't know about it, surreptitiously. And then we crack, so the crack looks sudden, but, there were fault lines. And yeah, for me, I mean, I'm a slow learner. I don't know, late bloomer. It just took me a while. Hello. And so there were a lot of cracks. And then I wind up on a solo 12-day retreat at 10,000 feet in a cabin that's actually called the Cabin of the Crazy One. And there's a chapter in the memoir called In the Cabin of the Crazy One. And I'm doing some, so-called restricted tantric teachings. I have had many vows along the path. I had been a meditation instructor. I had led retreats as part of a leadership team. And there I am in a solo retreat cabin on a mountain in Colorado, in a lot of trouble in my life. But here I am on retreat, just kind of sweating it out, doing these pretty intense energetic practices. And that's kind of when it all opens up for me. And, the nice thing about practicing Dharma is sometimes you have these elaborate instructions, which is just a form. And some people, they could use a form. It's good to have forms. It's good to know when you're eating dinner. It's good to know when you're sleeping. I mean, sometimes you need that structure to have some freedom. So you have the form, but you also need the freedom. So you start to get these visualizations going. And then the visualizations do whatever the hell they want. They don't have a Dharma. They don't have a book. And they start going a little crazy. And that's when, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but that's when things start to just open up for me. And then, of course, you're alone for 12 days. That was day one. So I got 11 more days to decide whether, what you see when you're alone without any reality check, is that the most real thing or is that the most delusional thing? Good luck.
It struck me as actually a very apt metaphor for what we're, at CARES, we have many transgender support groups. And this moment of COVID, and particularly this moment of self-isolation that a lot of young people, but also a lot of working people have gone through, has emboldened or allowed a lot of people to realize more about their gender, because they're not having their gender as mediated by the public. Seeing fewer people has meant this real moment to be like, oh, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I am not constantly getting the feedback from the world about what is valued? And in some ways it felt a little like that moment of yeah.
People are they don't know it, but they're on a Buddhist retreat with COVID, and they don't know, or any retreat really. I mean, the first level of attainment on the Buddhist, or really any religious path, frankly, is in Buddhism, it's just called renunciation. That's the step at the end of the first jhana, the so-called narrow path, the Hinayana. And renunciation is just sort of pulling the plug. Well, that's what COVID did for people. And so a lot of people kind of went through the chute, and, how am I going to do this? I'm going crazy. You saw people just kind of quaky online, on social media. And then something happened, and they started to say, hey, I'm kind of smoothing out myself here a little bit. And it was because some people anywhere were learning to do without. It's a horrible occasion for renunciation, but still, it happened for people. And maybe also the encounter with death and being so close to death and worried about COVID. A lot of people say, well, what am I living for? I might as well transition. I mean, I could be dead. I know someone who died or whatever. And so, every gateway is a good gateway, as they say.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's similar, without giving too much away, the sort of opening moment of the book is, if I'm going to die, I at least want to go out dressed one time, right? Like that.
Gave it all away. Oh my God. Total spoiler.
First page.
Nobody's going to push that button now. They're going to buy it.
There's so much in here. But I do think that is a real, I think honestly, Donald Trump's election did that for some people. And then because I think people are like, oh my God, we're going to have a nuclear war or something. And then I think COVID did that for a lot of people, of really facing mortality and being like, if I'm going to die, I have to die as my authentic self. And again, it's a horrible, crossroads to be at, but I'm seeing that over and over again with the people in our community who, even very young people who aren't necessarily thinking about it in terms of mortality, but they're thinking about it in terms of the climate crisis. They're thinking about it 10 years old and thinking about, like, I don't know what's going to happen in my life.
Yeah.
I want to be myself, and I I think the horrific things that we're seeing from the fundamentalists and the right wing um, extremists around trans people, they're so afraid because they are not wrong that there are many more of us than there used to be, and part of that is because people have had this moment to feel something related to gender and realize, hey, I don't want to go through life like this. But the other piece that I want to talk about that's so important is language. And you mentioned in the green room that Buddhism is sort of is primarily about silence, right? But you are a poet, and thinking through, like, identity requires possibility models, and sometimes possibility models must be construed through language. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about sort of reconciling how language helps construct identity broadly for you as a poet, but then also particularly in relationship to your gender, and how you ultimately were able to give yourself language related to these things.
Well, poetry is also about silence. And poems are good to the extent that they feel carved out of a space of great silence. And kind of where poetry and Buddhism meet, there's a lot of places they meet, but one is right speech, that sense of, the right name for a thing, appropriateness. And where they also meet is the idea of naming the unnameable. Even when poetry uses words, usually it's to circle something that can't be named.
Yeah.
You're saying to not say, or you're not saying to say. And, one of the things about approaching this body I wore, this memoir, I knew early on I was going to need every single tool I ever learned, in 3 decades of writing poetry and prose and journalism and all this other, but especially poetry, and I needed every trick in the book and then some, because I'm going into a time when there were no words for us. And I could summarize it and, just paste onto words that we have now what it was then and get all theoretical and talk like a brain on a stick, which is all too many trans books, frankly. Sorry. There's some tea we're spilling. And I call that transplaining, but that's not embodying the experience, which is what literature is. And this is why breaking a heart is important, because I don't want people to need a lecture. I want people to be able to just enter and feel like I'm close to them, or they're close to me, or they're me in another life, which is how the great fiction writer George Saunders puts it. In a great work of fiction, you are that character. You're yourself in another life. That's what that character is. If the fiction is working as literature, I'm not saying I succeeded, but that was the enterprise. But it was a little like trying to write myself into existence. I mean, what is a 17-year-old trans kid in 1970 or 1980 rather? What does that look like? What is that experience? What does the world look like when they are closeted to even themselves? And, what is it like to experience hate crimes when there's no group you could name that's being hated? What is that? Did it happen? Was it a hate crime? Was it not a hate crime? And how do you present that in a way, again, that embodies your reality at that time so that the reader can live in your skin and look through your eyes, which is all it means to be literary.
Yeah.
Is that you're walking in my shoes without any effort, frankly. Like easy reading is hard writing. And so, I was doing that same Buddhist thing, which is the same poetry thing, which is you circle something in order to point to the middle, but that middle is unnameable, and yet everyone can sense it somehow, and you're in it.
Well,
So it wasn't trying to be difficult. It was just trying to be appropriate with the language of that era.
yeah. And in a way, what you succeed with the embodiment in this book, which I do think this is such an embodied book. And I think people, that is the heartbreaking part of this. And it's a beautiful, beautiful part of this. And you do succeed in putting the reader into your body from childhood forward. You undo some of the sort of psychological violence that I think sometimes does occur in other trans books, which is a disembodiment, which is what has happened to us as trans people our whole lives. And I get so frustrated when I read a trans book and I'm like, oh, you're cut off right here. Like this is just another book that's about living in your head. Which is what so many trans people have to do to survive, right?
Yes.
Is to just pretend that you're a head on a stick and you don't have a body because it's so painful to live in your own body.
Absolutely.
And books can make you feel that way, and your book resists that at every turn, even when you're writing about disassociation, right? There's many moments in the book, when you're talking about, I'm trying really hard to stay in my body and I'm resisting disassociation, but it's present. And I think that's such a difficult thing to do stylistically. And I think it's so well done in here. And part of it is because you're seating us, in your body throughout time. And so one of the things we haven't talked about is that actually, the book begins, in the 80s, and then it flashes back to your childhood, and then sort of moves forward in time. So part two, the middle part of the book, goes back to your childhood, and you talk about the abuse that you experienced as a child, and a lot of really painful things. And I think, again, this felt like an important choice to me, because one of the things that trans people are taught to not talk about in mixed company is abuse, right? Because if you've suffered abuse, that can be wielded against you as like a reason why you're trans, right? Like if something bad happened to you when you were a kid, well, probably that's what made you like this, right? And so I think that's so silencing, and it's so damaging. And of course, we know that if abuse made people trans, 90% of America would be trans, right? So that's obviously not true. But that is, I was afraid for you even reading those pages, that would be something that would be wielded against you. But I think the way that you shape the narrative really resists that. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about literally sort of how you structured the childhood sections of the book, and was the book written in the order that it is presented to us, or did you go back and fold those in, or how did those parts come to be?
It was written almost in the order that you see it. The prologue wasn't the prologue at first. There's some jockeying around, in the first and third parts. But in terms of these big tectonic shapes, exactly that. The first part, I don't say this, and I didn't say it to myself at the time, but the first part is about culture. The second part is about family. The third part is about love. And I identify these at the end as the three obstacles, the three buckets of stuff that had to do with preventing me from being able to see who I was, which is why it took so long for me to transition. Why am I blind to myself? And I sold the book on part one because I knew that I had the tale of something that had never been depicted. I've never seen it depicted in narrative nonfiction, this kind of subculture of, New York City cross-dressing, this milieu in the 1980s and 90s. I've never seen it written about, not in a literary way. So, I wrote my proposal. I said, this is the first literary trans memoir for a mass reading audience. There's my money line. And, and I showed them these scenes at the Fabric Factory, at these other places, and just stepping into this world while I was also a New York City school teacher. So I wanted to lead with that. And then they say that every memoir that turns out any good has to somehow go to the basement. You enter the foyer and you go to the basement. What's in the basement? You don't know. That's why it's the basement. Will you get out of the basement? You don't know that either. You don't get out of your basement, you're dead. That's it. The book's over. You can't finish it. So you really need to go there. It's perilous. It was perilous to live through, but it was also perilous to write in terms of the craft. How am I going to somehow, having gone into this ditch of a basement, how do I come out of it? And how does it go with, the trans identity? And then, having been an abused kid, and, where do they meet? Where do they not meet? And then all of the things you're bringing up about, be really careful that, transphobic critics, are going to hook into this. This is not a transphobe. This is my cat, Boris, by the way. He's a beautiful photo bomber. Don't give them, a hook. And yet, you got to talk. You got to, because to me, I want this to be an everybody book. And part of everybody is the survivor community, the Buddhist community, the gay community, et cetera, trans men. I'm glad that trans men can find something here that matters to them, that's helpful. Even though I didn't travel in those circles, I absolutely be a hypocrite if I tried to say anything about trans male experience. But, I wanted it to have that opening. And then, of course, you have, trans critics who may get resentful that the book opens itself to that kind of essentialist criticism that, this is nothing but a demonstration of how trauma can screw up your gender identity. And you see it's not real, which is the number one bigotry against trans. At the heart of all trans bigotry is that we're not real.
Yeah.
Like I was born this way, you're a construct.
Right.
That's what Martina Navratilova says when she tweets, "I will protect women," at me. We had a Twitter war. I won, game, set, match. But I'm protecting trans women. I'm protecting women athletes, like women, like whatever. I wasn't even talking sports with her, but they say this, that I was born that I'm real and you're a construct, and so I didn't want to give away any of that. On the other hand, whatever, people think what they think. I just got to write it as best as I can and break a heart.
Well, and I think the reality is that our sanitized narratives only often accomplish sanitized political gains. I mean, often when we stick to the most polite vanilla milquetoast stories about queer and trans people, we leave the most vulnerable people out, and we don't accomplish radical political gains. We might get gay marriage, but we don't get a lot else. And as we're seeing now, politically, even gay marriage is not a well secured gain. I mean, I think often we settle for so much less than what we deserve in our humanity. Because we want to be palatable. And we, for good reason, we want to be safe. We want our families to be safe, all of those things. It's not, I don't ever critique people for that, but I do think I'm always grateful, and it feels like a breath of fresh air to read memoirs, or any art that is genuine. And it's like, yeah, this is the actual totality of all the stuff that got me here, or this is why it made it hard for me to get here.
Yeah.
And I think that's so beautiful in here. One of the things that I really liked was the stuff about not understanding why kids, or teens, really not kids, were discriminating against you. And that question of how can you suffer a hate crime if people don't even know what they're being bigoted about? Because to all the world, you were a straight man, straight cis man, right? You weren't gay.
At the time, I was this teenager who, was this, boy in Northport, all of this is in quotes, but sure, here I was, this athlete, smart alecky, kid, like any kid in high school. And I didn't even know what the hate group was, but there was a texture, there was a feeling tone to that hate that was irreducible. And I was irreducible to them. I think they sensed my transit, but nobody knew nobody knew how to name it, or including me.
Well, it's like, when I experienced homophobic violence as a butch dyke, people call me a fag all the time. And I was like, all right, like it's just that, like that weird, like the weirdness of like you're picking up on something.
Yep.
Like, but you're picking up on the exact wrong thing, but okay, but that violence, that sort of like tenuous undercurrent that people do pick up on about gender and sexuality. And I think, again, we're supposed to say like, no, gaydar is not real, or but people feel these things, and I think that's where. Go ahead.
Can I make a point about gaydar?
Yeah.
All right. You ready for this?
I'm here for it.
This is something, the Buddhists would call this self-secret. This is something that is right in front of our faces, and nobody talks about this. But even before we could name trans people, for the most part, the way people detected homosexuals, whether they be, men or women, was through gender.
Yes.
Not through sexuality. You can't see somebody partnering someone or not, but what you can see is a masculine seeming woman or a flaming guy. That's not sexuality. That's gender. Gay people have been using gender clues to indicate something not gender for decades.
Yeah, for time immemorial,
centuries, and it's right in front of our face, and it's such a false flag.
Well, and the irony is that now some of the transphobic gay and lesbian people who have supported and aligned with right-wing fundamentalist bigots, on these anti-trans bathroom bills, and particularly like anti-trans women bills and things like that, it's butch women.
Yeah, they're playing with gender with impunity,
but
which is right out of critical race theory, which is the beautiful part of critical race theory, which nobody really studies, is and they think they know, is the idea. One of the tenets is the idea that in any civil rights movement, the dominant group is going to benefit long before the oppressed group. All of these people benefiting from what we blew open in terms of gender expression. You got Timothy Chalamet getting these great grades for this lady's jacket that he wore at the Oscars with no risk whatsoever. Meanwhile, we're getting hammered.
Yeah. But what I was going to say about like the irony though is that there are queer people, like cis queer people, who are masculine, or masculine women who are going into the women's room, and they are being kicked out of the women's room. And it's well, this is the natural consequence of these anti-trans bills and legislation, right? It's like you're playing with fire if you align with bigots, in
the book, I write op-eds, I get into all sorts of good trouble with op-eds, but in the book, I am not political because I realize I don't have to be. Or to cut it another way, sometimes just being radically real and just stating your experience could be the most political thing in the world. Without any political agenda, what I've portrayed in this book, I now see, is the world that Republicans are trying to send trans kids back to. A world in which you cannot possibly see yourself. That was my high school.
Yeah.
That was my childhood. That was my young adulthood, where there's no literature allowed. You could lose your job. You could get arrested. That was it. I could have lost my job if someone saw me cross-dressing even. And so, in a way, try to escape politics. If what you're writing has some kind of depth to it, you know, watch out. You know, whereas if you have a conscious political program, you know, suddenly it's not so literary. Suddenly it's just your, it could be useful, it could be helpful, you know, in Congress on the floor of some state house, but it doesn't have the depth of literature, that trustworthiness of lived reality. I mean, I don't know the political meaning of, you know, Richard Wright's Native Son. I don't know the politics. I haven't analyzed it, but boy, has that liberated kids in a jail. I've seen that firsthand when they read Native Son, when I read James Baldwin, you know, when I read all these books by, you know, Black writers as a kid, I didn't question the politics, but that shaped me politically.
Yeah.
You know, as a person.
And actually, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, I think, you know, being a teacher can be really terrifying because students will tell you about yourself very quickly.
Yeah, that's accurate.
yeah, they will hone in on your insecurity and like just like poke at it endlessly.
Yeah.
So I wonder, you know, you were a teacher for a long time, both in public school and then within the juvenile justice system.
You know, old, right? Old.
So what? How do you think about your time teaching in term, particularly with younger with high school age kids, and I know you also obviously have taught at college level and workshops and lots of different kinds of people, right? But there's something uniquely vulnerable, I think, about teaching high school age kids. So, you know, when you think back to standing in front of a classroom of kids dressed in masculine clothes while you were, you know, figuring out your gender and your expression, did you just shut off that part of your life to go to work, or how did you think about it?
It's a great question, but before I respond, can I just ask, are we going to also invite people to raise hands? I don't know if people do that here.
Yes.
I don't even know how many people we have on the call. Who we got here, ER?
Yeah, well, we got lots of folks here. So yeah, I did put a little note in the chat. If folks have questions, feel free to ask. We would love your questions. Obviously, I can run my mouth all night, but it is always great to have other folks in the room. So
yeah, it's just, you know, so you hear the two of us talking. I'd like to hear others. You know, for me, you know, they say the best way to tell a lie convincingly is to lie to yourself first. So in a way, I couldn't have outed myself to the kids because I wasn't out to myself. So I wasn't conscious of anything to suppress, just the fact that I was going out cross-dressed, just that little thing, you know. Everyone's got something to hide except for me and my monkey. So, you know, and that I wasn't going to, you know, tell. I was, you know, occasionally worried about getting found out in one way or another. But outside of that, you know, I presented as a masculine person, but yet, you know, I was also dancing in companies as well as teaching, and you know, so that's very much a gay realm, especially the number of, you know, gay men who dominate the dance world in New York. And I, you know, as a poet and, you know, on the artistic side of things, you know, so there could be these data points they could look at that I might be gay or something like that. But, you know, kids who are, you know, teenagers, they're so worried about what they have going on. And as a teacher, I gave them a lot of challenges. I mean, you know, at Stuyvesant High School, which is where I was first teaching, they're gifted kids. They're very academic kids. So I gave them plenty to worry about. They weren't so much worried about me. They were worried about surviving Goetsch, you know, and they felt great pride at the end of the term to have emerged with, you know, perhaps a grade that didn't blemish their GPA. And they had a lot of pride about that. So it was actually a quite wonderful exchange. A lot of kids in the jail, though, they sensed, you know, and they went right to gay, and they were calling me, you know, a faggot, and they were saying that stuff. But then I went down to the gym and put a stop to that. And, you know, because I'm this lifelong athlete and I happen to have a dead-eye jump shot. and let somebody else teach them that there's plenty of gay people who have a good jump shot. So they didn't think so. So all it took was 3 swishes, and then I turned around and left, and it shut it down. So
Yeah.
But, yeah, mostly kids are so concerned about making their own way. It's such a tender age, and so many fears, and so much energy, and sometimes, often, that was the place where I felt the best about myself, because it was something I was good at. It was something I loved to do. It was a sense of community. I didn't have any community anywhere else, and so teaching saved me. Those kids saved me.
Yeah. You obviously are a poet, and you reference a lot of poetry throughout the book. What prose writers did you look to as guideposts as you were constructing this memoir?
I was reading 4 books, and I wrote this up in a LitHub piece, the books I read while I wrote my book. And I was reading them at the time, and I felt extremely nourished by these books, and they were very disparate. It was just randomly I came across these books. One was the Peregrine by J.A. Baker, incredibly disciplined journal of just stupendous description. Just a guy in a falcon. Frankly, that's it. But amazing. And I got things from it. Virginia Woolf's Writer's Diary. Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being showed me some things. I didn't plagiarize from any of these, but there were passages I wrote that I could not have written without these other passages. And then the Ferrante novels, those stupendous novels. She has enormous courage with complexity. She never balks at complexity. She goes right into it. No task too complex for Elena Ferrante. She is just an athlete and a magician. And she helped me never to compromise, never to simplify what in reality wasn't. At least that was the aspiration. And then, in terms of my own reading history, my motto for prose really comes from Emerson, who said of Montaigne, "Cut these words and they bleed." And that is my standard. And I may not be more talented than another prose writer, but I may have a higher standard. And cut these words and they bleed is a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying I succeeded. It's never too late to suck, which is something I also tell students. But, those were some of my inspirations. Thoreau's Walden, I had taught so many times. And that's in me. My poetry mentor, Stephen Dunn, sits on my shoulder. That's a pretty good person on your shoulder. And then the other shoulder is William Zinsser, my old friend and prose mentor, 1 thought per sentence. And he's just such a model of clarity. And also Bill had what I call the common touch, which is another thing I wanted for my book, so that it would sell more.
Yes. Well, it's already selling well. We can all be very excited about that. And actually, that's a very good segue, because I want to encourage folks to buy this book. Now we are doing this as a
minute. I don't know how do you know it's selling well? Do you know this?
Yeah, it looks like it's selling well in terms of all the coverage and everything that we're getting, which is great. So I have a comment from Juno. I love the LitHub piece so much. A treat to hear a writer talking about being nourished by other writers in the midst of the creative process. Hope you will write about Ferrante and Kundera someday too, and Stephen Dunn. So there you go. Juno requests. Additional.
I already wrote it. I had to cut the essay in half because of space consideration.
Well, so I want to encourage folks, you can buy Diana's book from Karis by clicking this teal button at the bottom center of your screen, or if you're a Left Books loyalist, we're glad you're here too, and you can buy it from Left Bank via the link on the right in the chat. Left Bank has a nonprofit, Left Bank Books Foundation. You can become a friend of Left Bank Books. I'm going to put that in there. Karis has a nonprofit, which you can support if you want. You can do that by the little pop-up. I want to just ask, Diana, is there anything that we didn't get? I mean, there's so much we could talk about. I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. But is there anything that you're like, I really want people to know this before we close out tonight?
Oh, wow. What do I want people to know?
About this book, I should be specific.
About the book. It's shiny. I don't know if you catch the shine, but do you see the shininess? Can you see it's got this sheen.
It's
See
great.
that? Oh, now here you go. Wait a minute. Can you? There it is. See the shine?
Yes, love it.
So that's something interesting. Fun fact.
Now, did you get to help with the cover, or did you just get final approval?
Yeah, well, I don't even get final approval, but I get to be consulted. And this is an award-winning designer named Na Kim, who designs a lot for FSG, but I think freelance and for other places as well. And she just gave approval for the cover on the audiobook. So now it's an audiobook cover and so forth. Oh, there's something to know. So if you don't hate my voice and are taking a long drive, it's available on. It's the first audiobook I ever recorded. I thought they'd get an actor, and they said, "No, it's you, honey. Come on in."
Great. Actually, that's rare. That is a big compliment, because I have many friends who are memoirists who did not get to do their own audiobook.
Yeah,
they were like deeply insulted, but so clearly that that's a big compliment.
we did it in 3 days, and it just went well. And at the end of the third day, I made an appointment with my therapist.
I mean, I would need to see a therapist after hearing my own voice for 3 days. That's a lot.
And it was loud in my own ear. Come on, honey.
Even if you've done all the work in the world on your voice, I think even cis people would have voice dysphoria after all that. That's quite a lot.
Michelle's writing a review. I've just read in the New York Times that Michelle is writing where's your review going to be, Michelle?
We're excited.
Michelle, she'll have a dual relationship and she can't write it ethically.
That's right. Michelle, do your thing and then send it to us after the fact. Well, this has been so.
Just one thing I want to say. Actually, this reminds me. There was one review that's not a review of my book. It's an essay, and it says it's about my book, but that's fine. It's a gorgeous essay about what she calls queer temporality. It's an autostraddle. It is written by Melissa Falaveno, who's a queer essayist. It is one of the most gorgeous, talk about heartbreaking. And she talks about, I can't talk enough about this essay, and it's about queer time and the schedule our lives are on. And one of the things I love about this essay, LGB and T don't always get along so well. This essay links all of us, and it does it in a way that is not political. It's just deep and it's real. And I would recommend that essay to people. Michelle Falaveno.
I just dropped it in the chat.
Oh, you're good. Boy, I got to watch you. You're tricky.
I would love people.
Everyone, he's going to have a pop-up right outside your front door if you go out to get the milk.
That's right. So Jindy Writer says, great talk. I've been a fan of your poetry for years, Diana. Looking forward to reading this. I related to what you both said about transitioning during the pandemic. So wonderful. Yes. So to all the folks who are just coming into an awareness of your gender, congratulations. I think this book will really resonate with folks. And, there's a lot of us out there, so I hope one of the great things, many things have been lost in the age of the internet, but one of the great things is finding the community. There are so many trans folks who are building connections online, and it's a beautiful time to be trans despite all of the fundamentalist BS that's happening in the world. Even getting to do things like this, right, which never would have been possible. So thank you all so much for being with us. Thanks to our friends at Left Banks, and most especially thank you to Diane.
Pleasure, and thank you. You are a wonderful conversation. And is this where we wave goodbye?
It is, yeah. So until next time, take good care. Everybody stay safe, and buy Diana's book, The Body I Wore. Good night.